state and national affairs. I will start by talking about the budget process. I'm happy to have this be a dialogue in which if I say something you want to raise a question or about the process, please do. I'll try to speak from both sides of the aisle, from what I know in terms of Peter and Denise. And I know that they both would very much have liked to have been here. Let me tell you just a moment about both of them. Both of them are very well prepared for their roles. Both of them are quite conscientious. And conscientiousness to me is measured by their being present, not only in House sessions, but also in their committees. So if they told you that they had a committee meeting that they needed to be at, rather than to be here, with all due respect, it's certainly more important for them to show up there and to help manage very difficult questions. The budget process was probably bad from the beginning. I think it was an error, and it was my own advice within our caucus to our leadership and passed through to the governor's office that to use the slots at the racetrack as a kind of a triad or as a third leg on the budget stool was probably an error for a lot of different reasons. One is it seems to me never to make sense to build a budget on the quicksand of ephemeral gains and losses and risk that are to be associated with wagering. It was constitutionally in doubt as well about whether we could expand slots beyond the lottery as a matter of constitutional law. As you know, the Supreme Court told us. They used another means, but they essentially said, in my judgment, no. And so that gave an opening to the gambling groups to help create an additional climate that they benefited from in spending $53 million to give us the 4 casino locations, including Cincinnati. Interestingly enough, as you all know from our last debate here with Congressman Lucan and me, that was a constitutional amendment. And now, believe it or not, within 60 or 90 days, we have to pass another constitutional amendment to move the Columbus Casino from one neighborhood in Columbus to another neighborhood because the business community and the political community doesn't like the location that was set in the Constitution. So let's all shake our heads about what a woeful thing that was for our process. Back to the budget, when the slots fell through and also the tobacco trust fund money is sort of on the skids, legislatures since the Taft administration have plundered the tobacco money in order to use it for other things, because that's what a legislature does. It's a little bit like the Congress or the state legislature or a city council. It's only important when something important comes up. We don't pay much attention to it day to day, but when there's a big issue, that lets us know how important these roles are. And the amount that we took, I think, was the last near $300 million. It would have been my preference to keep the money for anti-tobacco spending purposes. I would hope much on direct health issues rather than as much on, they spent a lot of it on public relations, which to me was like dropping it out of an airplane. But we were left with an approximate $815 to $850, I think, $million budget hole that had to be plugged very quickly, and mechanically a decision had to be made because if we hadn't figured it out, we wouldn't be able to get the tax forms out to know what to do. So there was a 5-year, 21% income tax cut, which I also think was not smart for a number of reasons. The reason for that is because the 21% income tax cut benefited largely a percentage of Ohioans who are in the top 1% of income earners in the state. So that would have impacted Dr. Bozian, but not me. I would have gotten a sort of a return of, say, $100. Dr. Bozian would have gotten $10,000 or $12,000 on his. Yeah. And I hope you didn't mind me using you for that example, Doctor. I knew you would take it in good spirit. It isn't always true, as you know, as President Reagan used to say, that a rising tide lifts all boats. And it was wrong for him to say that, to compare his tax cuts to the tax cuts that President Kennedy offered, saying that, well, Jack Kennedy did it and it raised the economy and we can do it too. Completely different set of times, different kind of economy. So the governor was left after having slashed the payrolls of some 4,000 employees and several $1 billion. We were still over $800 million in the hole, and one way to fill the hole would have been to halt the last fifth of the tax cuts, which would be, if we did that, that would just about meet the number that we had to fill. So we very quickly got to that decision in the Democratic caucus. The Republican caucus basically, I think they basically suggested, let's do more cuts. And those cuts probably would have come out of public education. The governor was basically saying this $850 or so million was going to be used back in education. There was a lot of criticism of the education plan because it's kind of a 10-year plan and largely unfunded. Things like all-day kindergarten, per capita pupil expenditures on the basis of the need of the child rather than a kind of formula that equalized. In other words, the new education plan is designed to educate a child on the basis of what they really need to get educated versus putting all the money in a pool and then spreading it out per capita among the children. And those costs, of course, would be very high. The thinking was that this would remove the stain of our state from funding an unconstitutional educational system because we weren't meeting the needs of our children. So special needs children would get a certain amount as they do, and